Hello and welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Today, we will listen to a story that highlights the unfortunate reality many service workers, especially those in family caregiving, face when their rights aren't clearly protected or respected. This story will take you through an unexpected situation, the consequences of Karen and Ken's stinginess. When Karen tried to argue over a small amount of $12.50, equivalent to half an hour of work, and insisted that the nanny should track her hours more accurately, little did she know that this would lead the nanny to revisit all the unpaid hours worked in the past. If you find this story interesting and filled with valuable lessons, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more meaningful insights. The family I work for criticized me sharply for charging an extra $12.50, a small amount they actually owed me according to the contract. This unfairness made me upset, but instead of arguing, I chose a surprising approach. I carefully reviewed all the hours I had generously not charged in the past. The result of this review not only exposed the unfairness but also forced them to repay me hundreds of dollars, even close to $2,000 in wages I rightfully earned but had been overlooked. Karen and Ken are a wealthy couple living in a luxurious home, but their lavish lifestyle only hides one truth: they are extremely stingy and penny-pinching. They have a son named Bob, whom I care for with great responsibility and care. In contrast to Karen and Ken, I also work with Henry, a kind-hearted and generous single father. Henry lost his loving husband a few years ago, but he always strives to provide his son Steve with a warm and loving life. Henry is always willing to pay me the full service fees and even thanks me for supporting Steve as he navigates his challenges at school. However, it is the stark contrast between these two families that makes this story so intriguing. Karen and Ken, with their tight-fisted ways, didn't realize that their attempt to save a small amount of money ended up costing them much more in the long run. Meanwhile, Henry's generosity not only made me feel appreciated but also motivated me to handle the situation cleverly and decisively. I have been a nanny for many years, and during that time, I have been fortunate to work with families who are kind and reasonable. This is not always the case, but I've learned how important it is to set clear rules from the start, which helps maintain smooth and positive relationships with the families I work with. One of the most crucial aspects for me is the contract. A contract is not just a legal document, it is a tool to ensure fairness and transparency for both parties. In the contract, I always ensure that my working hours are clearly outlined, meaning if the family decides to go on vacation or has plans that don't require my services for a certain period, I will still be paid. This is very important because I am still available to work if needed, even if the family doesn't request it. It's a form of protection for my time and effort, ensuring that I am not disadvantaged by any last-minute changes from the family. Imagine it like a gym membership. Even if you don't go to the gym for the entire month, you still pay for the service you've subscribed to. Even if you're not using the service, you maintain your rights, and that's fair. This is a standard and reasonable clause in nanny contracts, and I always make sure that every family I work with understands this rule. In addition to the working hours clause, another important part of my contract is the nanny share provision. This is a section that I always find very fair and reasonable. If two families want to combine their childcare for a day instead of hiring two separate nannies, I will take care of both families' children for the day, and each family will pay 2/3 of my regular rate. This benefits both sides. I get to care for more children and earn a little extra to compensate for the increased workload, while the families save some costs because instead of paying the full rate for one nanny per family, they only pay a portion. I always see this flexibility in childcare as a big advantage, showing effective collaboration between families while also allowing me to adjust my work to fit my schedule. All of these elements are part of the principles I maintain to ensure fairness for both parties, for me and the families I serve. Establishing clear terms from the beginning helps avoid misunderstandings and also ensures I maintain professionalism in my work, while building long-term trust with the families. The family of Karen and Ken, whom I had been working for a while, had planned a trip to Hawaii 3 weeks ago. This was a long-awaited vacation for them, and as usual, I was hired to look after their son, Bob. According to our nanny contract, I am always paid in full even when the family goes on vacation and doesn't need my services. This is not just a right guaranteed in my contract but also a principle I have followed throughout my nanny career. Even when the family is on vacation and doesn't require my childcare services, I still get paid because I am still available if they need me. Before they left, Karen and Ken asked me to look after Bob on the Sunday after they returned from the trip, so they could have some time to rest and recover from the long journey. I immediately agreed, and the working hours were clearly set from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on that day. Everything seemed to be going well, and I was mentally prepared to carry out my duties. After the trip, everything went smoothly. When Karen and Ken landed from their flight, they texted me to inform me that they would meet me at 8 a.m. the next day, as scheduled. I got everything ready, and right at 7:30 a.m. on Sunday, when I was about to leave the house, I received a message from Karen saying that Bob had just woken up and would need some extra time to get ready. Therefore, she asked me to delay my arrival to 8:30 a.m. instead of the original 8 a.m. Although the schedule change may have caused a slight inconvenience, I still sympathized and understood that sometimes plans can change unexpectedly, especially when it involves a child. Therefore, I didn't object and rearranged the time to continue the work as agreed. After the workday was completed, Karen asked me for another favor. She suggested that I stay for overtime the following week to help them attend 2 separate appointments. This wasn't a difficult request for me, as I'm always willing to assist a family if I can, and I also understand that they need some time to relax and recharge after busy schedules. I agreed to this request and told her that I would adjust my schedule to assist them. Karen also made it clear that she would pay for all overtime hours over the weekend, as it would be more convenient for both sides. For me, this wasn't a big deal, because I always maintain a flexible attitude and am ready to meet the needs of the families I work with. In fact, I've always found that one of the most important aspects of being a nanny is the flexibility in adjusting working hours to fit the family's schedule. However, what I felt was that, although I agreed to Karen's request for overtime, the sudden change in hours, even if just a small adjustment, made me feel disrespected in a way that I didn't deserve. I always respect the commitments in the contract, and I also expect the same level of respect from the family I work for. The change in hours and the request for overtime made me reflect more on how I need to manage agreements and commitments in my nanny work, as well as how families should respect the principles that have been set from the beginning. At the end of the week, I had worked an additional 8 hours to allow Karen and Ken to attend their 2 appointments. For me, being a nanny isn't just about taking care of children, it's about being committed to helping families achieve their personal goals. So, I was ready to work overtime when they asked. I requested that Ken pay me for 16 hours of work, including both regular and overtime hours. However, Ken's reaction surprised me. He said that he needed to check with Karen first to confirm the hours to be paid. This seemed quite strange and unreasonable to me because, according to the contract and the previous agreement, all payments had already been clearly established. Why was it now necessary to confirm the hours in such detail? My feeling at this point was that there was inconsistency in the way this issue was being handled by the family, especially when they had already agreed to clear terms from the start. When I returned home after the workday, I received a message from Karen, and I must admit that the content of this message made me feel deeply upset and disappointed. In the message, Karen began with what seemed like very sincere thanks. "Hello Meowsasaurus, thank you for helping our family these past weeks. Ken and I felt very comfortable, and the show was really funny." While I was grateful to receive this thank you, it also made me feel as though my efforts and hard work were not being properly acknowledged. What was more concerning was the latter part of the message, where Karen said, "Since we went to Hawaii, you were paid for the whole week even though you didn't work." This was a big issue. According to our contract, I had the right to be paid during their vacation because I was still available if they needed me. In fact, I didn't see this as a big amount or unfair. It was a benefit I had been guaranteed from the beginning, and I accepted it without complaint. But it seemed that Karen thought paying me for the time when they didn't use my services was something excessive, which made me reconsider her attitude toward my work. Karen continued in the message, "We feel this is unfair because it's a large amount, so we want to apply those hours to Sunday and Monday." This truly made me feel disrespected. They not only wanted to adjust an already agreed-upon arrangement, but they also tried to minimize the amount they owed me, even though it had been clearly agreed that I would be paid fully, even when not working. They wanted me to apply the hours I worked on Sunday and Monday to the hours I had already been paid for during their vacation, which was not only a violation of the contract but also demonstrated a lack of respect for my effort. The conclusion of Karen's message was that they would only pay me for 8 hours instead of the 16 hours, a significant reduction from the actual hours I had worked. This made me feel as though all my hard work and dedication over the past period had not been properly valued. I had spent many hours assisting their family, but instead of receiving proper recognition, I was now faced with being asked to reduce the amount I rightfully earned. Upon receiving Karen's message, I couldn't contain the growing anger inside me. Karen's actions were not only an infringement on my rights but also a lack of respect for the effort and professionalism I had put in. I had worked tirelessly to ensure everything went smoothly for their family, but now, instead of receiving the recognition I deserved, I was faced with an unreasonable attempt to cut my pay. I immediately took a screenshot of the contract I had signed, which clearly stated that I would be paid in full during the family's vacation, whether I worked or not. This was a right I had been protected by the contract, and I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. I simply requested fairness, but instead, I was faced with opposition and attempts to find a way to unfairly reduce my pay. I reminded Karen that this action was a breach of the contract, but her response showed no acknowledgement or correction, only a reluctant acceptance. She agreed to pay the full 16 hours, but her attitude was clearly unwilling. This made me feel like my efforts were not being truly appreciated. Immediately, Karen responded and began criticizing me with a very stern attitude. "On Sunday, we told you to come at 8:30, not 8 o'clock. This was an incredibly surprising and disrespectful response, because in the contract, we had clearly agreed on the working hours, and any changes should have been communicated in advance. Her insistence on the time without taking responsibility for the last-minute schedule change only highlighted the sense of injustice I was experiencing. Karen continued, "We were very generous in paying you during our vacation." This statement made me even more upset, as I never asked them to be generous with me. It felt as though they were treating paying me for the entire duration of their vacation as a special act, rather than a contractual obligation they had to honor. I felt disrespected by this, as if I didn't deserve fair treatment but was just a gift they were bestowing upon me. But what frustrated me the most in Karen's message was the line, "We expect you to keep a more accurate track of your working hours next time. This is unacceptable." This showed a clear lack of respect and a tendency to blame me. While I had been diligent in following the schedule and keeping track of my hours, Karen blamed me as if I were the one at fault in this situation. This really made me feel that my hard work and professionalism were being completely disregarded. Her saying that this was unacceptable only reinforced the feeling that my work and contributions were not being properly valued. Finally, Karen stated that they would only pay me for 15.5 hours instead of the 16 hours agreed upon. This was a small reduction, but it was highly significant in this context, as it wasn't just about the money but about fairness and respect for the contract. It made me feel not only financially shortchanged but also disrespected in my work. After receiving Karen's response, I couldn't help but reconsider my relationship with this family. Despite my dedication, their lack of respect and breach of contract left me feeling incredibly disappointed. I began to realize that I needed to be more assertive in protecting my rights, not just in my work but also in professional relationships in general. This situation taught me that, even though I had been working with dedication, I could not always expect fairness from the families I worked for. It was a valuable lesson about standing up for myself and defending my rights in work relationships, even in jobs that might seem as simple as babysitting. Just a difference of $12.50, but I decided to go big. The relationship between me and Karen and Ken's family had started off quite amicably. However, over time, I realized that the extra hours I had worked for them were not being properly valued. Specifically, Bob had often participated in music and football classes with Steve outside of my contracted hours since January. These were hours I was not paid for, despite always spending time and effort looking after Bob during those lessons. Karen, despite benefiting from my care for Bob, never mentioned paying for these hours, whereas Henry, the kind-hearted single dad, was more than willing to pay me the full rate so Steve could bond and have fun with Bob. Henry understood the value of fostering friendships for his son while also acknowledging my efforts and looking after the kids. Even so, I never requested anything extra, as I truly enjoyed watching Bob and Steve play together. That feeling, the connection between the two children, was a huge spiritual reward for me. However, after being repeatedly overlooked and not compensated for these extra hours, I felt it was time to take action. I realized I couldn't keep quiet and let these contract violations slide anymore. Determined to reclaim what was mine, I started calculating all the hours Bob spent in activities with Steve outside of my contracted hours. I dedicated quite a bit of time to this task, knowing that without proper calculations, I wouldn't be able to demand that Karen and Ken pay me back what they owed. The result was that I discovered they owed me nearly $2,000 for the hours Bob had spent in music and football classes. Though I'm not someone who likes to burden the families I work for, I couldn't continue to ignore this situation. I knew my work had value, and I had the right to demand what was owed to me. I decided to share this discovery with the group chat, including Karen, Ken, and Henry. At this point, I was no longer just the meek babysitter, I was starting to realize the value of my work. In the group chat, I messaged with honesty and seriousness. Karen said tracking work hours accurately is very important, so I checked everything, including shared hours. Luckily, I did. I didn't realize we forgot to track all the hours Bob spent in football and music. Henry, I'm so sorry, but Karen actually owes you quite a bit. If my calculations are correct, they owe you $X and me $Y. This message wasn't just me providing information, it was a strong statement that I was no longer the passive babysitter accepting everything. Not only had I checked all the hours, but I had also made it clear to everyone how much they owed me. I didn't forget to remind them that Karen and Ken needed to fulfill their obligation to pay me fairly. Henry's response was an incredibly important encouragement for me. He didn't just sympathize, he stood by me, making me feel respected. He replied in the chat, Karen and Ken, I'm really disappointed to learn that Meowsasaurus hasn't been paid fully all this time. I don't need the hours reimbursed because I want Steve to continue playing with Bob, but you two need to pay Meowsasaurus what she's owed right away. These words not only expressed sympathy but also a strong endorsement of my rightful demands. He wasn't just protecting his own interests, he was standing up for mine, making me feel I wasn't alone in this fight. After Karen and Ken realized the seriousness of the situation, they paid me back a large sum I hadn't expected. It was a significant amount of money and truly meaningful, as it not only compensated for the work I had done but also served as a reminder to respect and acknowledge workers. However, while the money was valuable, it couldn't replace the respect I deserved. Finally, I decided to find a new family to work for. This decision wasn't just about money. It was about not wanting to continue working in an environment where respect was lacking. I planned to submit my resignation to Karen and Ken as soon as I found a new family, and this was a decision I felt very proud of. My story is an important lesson about respect and recognizing the hard work of employees, no matter how unnoticed the job may seem. Being disrespected and not paid fairly can be hurtful, but instead of silently enduring it, we need to stand up for our own rights. No one deserves to be exploited, and it is crucial to be aware of our own value in the workplace. The biggest lesson here is, when you know your rights and have the courage to demand them, you not only protect yourself but also reclaim the respect you deserve. Just like in work or life, never be afraid to speak up when you know you're right, because sometimes, standing up for yourself is what brings the best results. Always remember that your worth is not just in the hours you work but in how you protect your own rights. Facing stingy families or those who don't respect contracts can be disappointing, but you did the right thing by not submitting. Keep maintaining a professional attitude and firmly protect your rights, while remembering that fairness in work is a right you must demand. Don't be afraid to stand up when you're treated unfairly, because doing so not only helps you maintain self-respect but also sets a powerful example for others. In life and work, sometimes asserting your value is the key to gaining respect and long-term success.